Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this Microfiche time capsule, we are continuing our Lives of Our Leaders series, and this one is from the Juvenile Instructor from 15 October 1900, and this article is entitled Lives of Our Leaders, the Apostles, Marriner W. Merrill. So, probably, I don't know, a decade ago, 10 years ago, I did a questionnaire where I asked a bunch of people which apostles they were familiar with and which ones they weren't, so they could just mark off the ones they'd had heard of. And of all of the apostles that people had not heard of, I gathered them the last 20 and wrote articles on them. That's why I have so many. But Marriner W. Merrill came in dead last, and nobody had heard of him. I think it's a little funny, and when you read about his life, you're like, oh, I see why. But so you'll see as we go on, and I will explain it by the end. But he is the least known apostle of all those who served since Joseph Smith called the first few. So I don't want to give away too much, but I am relatively familiar with his life, and we could talk about it afterwards and take a look at my article that I wrote on him. So, Lives of Our Leaders, the Apostles, Marriner W. Merrill. Apostle Merrill's life in Cache Valley and its far-reaching influence throughout northern Utah and southern Idaho has for many years made him a leading character among men. His great farms, his beautiful homes, his industrial enterprises in dairying and milling all indicate a high degree of thrift and enterprise which show up strongly the life and character of the man. His powers of organization, his personal and family discipline, his persistent effort and indomitable will make his life a study of value to all young men who undertake to grasp and deal with the material conditions of life and bring the forces of nature to their aid and use. The apostle's broad form and the set features of his face indicate superior strength, and his whole bearing indicates, above all things, power. He is not a man of many words, but is prone to feel the silent forces of life and observe the feelings and thoughts of others. Little given to speculative philosophy and poetical imaginations, he is nevertheless a man of strong and abiding faith, of faith that has to do with the practical affairs of life, and which serves the present needs of those who have strong convictions. Apostle Merrill's general bearing and strong inclinations for business pursuits may incline some people to suppose that his life and nature are largely materialistic, and save those who know him well, few suspect the strong spirituality in his nature. This forceful spirit and strong character was born to the world in Sackville, Westmore County, New Brunswick, in Canada, September 25th, 1832. His grandparents on his father's side were both born in the state of Maine, but they immigrated to Nova Scotia, where his father, Nathan Merrill, was born September 25th, 1794. The father never came to this country, but devoted his life to farming and cutting and hauling of timber in his native land. The subject of this sketch was one of a family of 13 children, of whom 2 died in infancy. The family then consisted of 5 boys and 6 girls. The third son went to sea about 1850 and is thought to have been drowned. One son, Thomas, came to the United States where he was a butcher for some time and later became a sea captain and diver. Apostle Merrill is the 4th son of the family and today stands alone and representative of his father's house, as he now has but one living brother, and that brother has no children. In his youth, the life of Marriner W. Merrill was not unlike that of the farmer of those regions of the country in which he lived. But the spiritual influences of his life began early to manifest themselves, and became prophetic of what his later years would be. At the age of 9 years, he received in an open vision a picture of his own future life, and that of the people with whom he subsequently became identified. In simple, earnest, and convincing words, that vision was related to the writer as follows. When I was a boy of 9 years, my mother sent me to the hayfield where my father and brothers were at work, to call them to dinner. On the way, I became unconscious, and was clothed with a vision which I distinctly remember when I gained my usual feelings and thoughts. After I became conscious, I found myself in a log cabin located on the way to the field. In this cabin, I was on my knees in the attitude of prayer. In the vision, I saw the church and the prophets Joseph and Brigham. I saw the travels of the latter and of the saints from Nauvoo and winter quarters to Utah. In the vision, the sight of the covered buggies and wagons was peculiar to me, for at that time I had never seen such vehicles, nor had I ever seen the mules which I beheld in my vision. I saw 2 and sometimes 6 mules to a wagon, and in the companies of pioneers I beheld 2 men who had been boy friends of my youth, and each of them had more than one wife. In my vision at that time the divinity of plural marriage was revealed to me. I comprehended the doctrines and principles as they had been revealed. The progress and development of the church were shown, and the persecutions of the saints were made clear to my understanding. And I heard a voice which told me that all I beheld was true. But I was cautioned to keep to myself what I had seen until I should have the opportunity of leaving my native country. Upon reaching home I was pale, and it was some time before I could speak distinctly. That incident of my life made a very strong impression upon my boyish mind, and one day I ventured to ask my mother a question about plural marriage, why it was not practiced now, as in the days of God's ancient people. She answered in surprise by asking what I knew about such things. Fearing that I might betray the secret revealed, I made no more mention of the matter. So he was born in Canada, and the way they're describing it as if his parents were members, they were not. I mean, his father was not. His mother was, but she had kept it a secret. She had joined the church, in her youth, and kind of taught the doctrines to her kids, but didn't tell them that she had been baptized. And so when Marriner and W. Merrill later became baptized and he went home and told his mom, she was like, "Oh, really? I've been baptized in that church." It was like, wait, what? It's kind of incomprehensible to me how you could not tell your kids something like that, but I guess maybe it just didn't come up. I don't know. But it's interesting, actually, how that came about. And he was also one of several apostles who were from Canada. When you think about, John Taylor moved down from Canada, and there were several others now that I can't think of off the top of my head, but he was just one of several Canadian members of the church who later became prominent. So, thank you, Canada, for providing such amazing people. He was also very, large guy. He had really broad shoulders, and he was very strongly built, a big and brawny dude. So that was part of it as well, because later on some of the things he had to do were kind of only conducive to big and brawny dudes. So anyways, let's keep going. But I think it's really interesting how he had this very strong vision at age 9, revealing several aspects of the future for himself and several people he knew. So that's kind of remarkable. I mean, don't know how many people that I know have had anything like that happen to them. So the gospel was first preached to Apostle Merrill by a native elder. Later, elders John Scarry and Jesse Crosby came into the neighborhood of his home. In April 1852, at the age of 19 years, he was baptized by Elder Scarry, and on the 5th of September of the same year, he was ordained a priest by Elder Crosby. About a year before this, he had learned that his mother had been for a long time a member of the church, she having been baptized as early as 1836. His father died before his baptism. One of his sisters joined the church, but subsequently married a non-Mormon and soon turned away from the faith. The other members of the family, though not willing to embrace the gospel, never manifested any hostile opposition to it. So, there you go, they're all neutral except his mother, who actually thought it was cool. Feeling that there was work to accomplish which could not be done in New Brunswick, the spirit of gathering having taken possession of Brother Merrill, he started about a year after his baptism for the West. He had gone no farther than Boston when his father died, and word came from his mother to return and settle the estate. After affairs had been settled at home, in 1853, he started out again and came direct to Boston. From there he went to Buffalo by train, and traveled on the lakes to Chicago. From Chicago, he rolled on the first railway from Chicago to the head of the Illinois River. At the latter point he took a boat for St. Louis, which was then headquarters for supplies, and then came to Keokuk by steamboat. As he journeyed westward, he stopped a week at Canesville, but met no saints there. I'm not sure why they're telling all this detail. He traveled, he traveled towards Salt Lake, yeah? It took a while. That's kind of all that really needed to be said. The company with which he traveled crossed the river on ferry boats and pursued their way on to Salt Lake City. There were 11 wagons in the company. Jesse Crosby was captain and was assisted by William Atkinson. The company arrived in Salt Lake City on September 11th, 1853. The most important event in the journey associated with the life of Apostle Merrill occurred at Platte River, where he, with one other boy, decided to cross the river and get some cattle which had been left by other pioneers. They plunged into the river, but he soon became exhausted as the current was strong. Brother Merrill was unable to keep his head out of the water, and while floating downstream went under twice, whereupon the company became alarmed, and a Brother Reese was sent to his assistance. As he started to sink a third time, he landed mysteriously on a sandbar, and was almost exhausted. The circumstance was peculiar because Brother Reese, who had sought his rescue, was unable to find the bar upon which Brother Merrill stood. The two now made their way to the opposite shore, where it was shallow enough to walk upstream until they reached a place where the current moved from one side to the other. Here they tied a comforter to their waists, plunged again into the water, in which they were borne safely across the river by the favorable current. They were both thankful to get back alive, and the cattle, which they found disabled, were left undisturbed. You just have to say he almost drowned. It is interesting that he found a sandbar to stand on, and yet the other person did not. If you've ever tried to stand up in a river that's quite current, like the current's quite strong, it's not easy. It is not easy. It's trying really hard to push you in the direction. The water is really hard to resist. So, I've been there, done that, but not quite in so spectacular a situation, obviously. But, almost drowning is scary, yeah? And it was quite a common way to die back then, so. Brother Merrill's first effort on reaching the valley was to secure work. His early efforts were a source of trial, as his employers sometimes proved to be unreliable. In Salt Lake City, he agreed to work for $20 a month. After 3 weeks, some trouble arose, and he was about to leave his employer when the latter offered him $26 per month. He thereupon agreed to remain and work in the canyon getting out shingle timber, where he made as many as 1,000 shingles in a day. He was then promised his board and a certain percentage of the shingles sold, but his employer did the selling and kept the money. Jeez, that sucks. After some controversy, however, payment was secured, and the experience, no doubt, did much to induce the habit which has subsequently become prominent in the life of Brother Merrill, a habit of working on his own account. Yeah, I don't blame him for that. If you've been duped once, then that's once too many times, In November of the year 1853, Brother Merrill was married to Sarah A. Atkinson and immediately went to a place in Bingham Canyon, 7 miles above its mouth, where he passed the winter making shingles. The new venture became a profitable one. The shingles then sold at $8 per thousand, and he was able to make 500 a day. After sitting in the canyon 6 weeks, he ventured on a perilous journey home to see his wife. The snow was 7 feet deep, and having no food with him when he began the journey, he was overborne by fatigue and weakness, and almost fainted before he reached a cabin where a woman gave him a small piece of bread to satisfy his craving. This was only a taste for a starving man, but in a few hours more food was given, and little by little he overcame the exhausted condition by which his physical system was brought. After his long walk and sufferings, he was disappointed in not finding his wife at home, as she had gone off to work, so that he was obliged to return without seeing her. Well, that wasn't very smart, now was it? No offense, but that was not the smartest thing he's ever done. Yeah. During Apostle Merrill's life in Salt Lake City, he engaged in work in North Mill Creek Canyon and gives the following remarkable experience in an article printed in the Juvenile Instructor, October 15, 1892. The circumstances of the narration are so remarkable that I give it here in full. Okay, we're quoting another article, yeah? In the winter of 1855, I worked in what was then called North Mill Creek Canyon. Oh, is this his accident? I think this is his accident, yeah? This is an interesting accident, yeah? The only team I had at that time was one yoke of oxen. With this, I kept myself busy during the latter part of the fall of 1854 and the beginning of the winter of 1855 in hauling wood from the canyon to Salt Lake City, where I sold it for what I could. In January 1855, the snow in the mountains was so deep that I was unable to procure firewood, and I decided to haul some pine house and stable logs. Myself and some brethren therefore shoveled and broke the road to a small red pine patch of timber in the side mountain, and when this road was completed, for 2 days we together hauled logs and timber to the city. Just at this time the weather became extremely cold and dense winter fog hung over the valley, but high up in the mountains one could overlook the cloud of fog. This condition prevailed for several days, but exactly how cold it was I cannot say, as thermometers were very scarce in those days. It was during one of the early days of this cold spell that the following incident occurred. I left home very early in the morning to obtain a load of logs. My wife remonstrated me and tried to prevail upon me not to go, as the weather was so very cold. I did not, however, heed her kind entreaties, but started upon my journey, and on arriving at the timber was surprised to find that I was the only one who had come for a load. I worked very rapidly for 2 reasons. One was that I might keep warm, and the other that I might return home early. I cut, trimmed, and prepared 5 nice red pine logs about 30 feet long and 10 inches thick at the butt end, and about 6 inches at the top. These I succeeded in getting down to the place where I had left my bobsled and camp outfit about a half-mile distant. The place of loading was very slippery, it being rather on a side of the hill. I had my 5 logs arranged side by side below the sled, my oxen being chained to a stump where they were quietly eating their hay. I proceeded to load the logs, designing to place 3 on the bottom and 2 on the top of the 3, which was my usual way of hauling timber of that kind. I succeeded in getting the first log on the sled without much difficulty. The bunk, canyon men will know what a bunk is, especially if they were born in New Brunswick, being icy, it was with some difficulty that I could make the log stay where I had placed it on the sled, but I finally succeeded in blocking it up and thought it secure. Then I turned around to load the second log, and as I did so the blocking gave way, and the first log slid rapidly from the sled, catching me in the hollow of my legs and throwing me forward on my face across the log lying there. In falling, the handspike in my hand, which I had been using in loading the logs, fell far from my reach, and I was thus pinioned completely across the timber. The log that had slipped from the sled lay across my legs, which were on the hard ice, and my body was lying across the 4 logs. I began to think that I was thus doomed to perish in the canyon. I struggled desperately to release myself, but every effort seemed to bind me the more firmly beneath the terrible load, which seemed crushing my very bones. While thus struggling for relief, I also prayed earnestly to the Lord for assistance, and while doing so I lost consciousness. When I next regained my senses, I was half a mile down the canyon from the place where I began to load, and was seated upon the logs, which were loaded in the exact position that I had designed to put them, 3 on the bottom and 2 on the top of the 3. All were nicely bound with chains. I was sitting upon my sheepskin with the woolly side up. My whip was placed on the load so carefully it could not lose. My overcoat, homemade jeans, lay across the load in front of me but within my reach. As I roused from my stupor, I spoke to my oxen and they stopped, and I viewed my surroundings with feelings that cannot be described. I quickly took my bearings as I was familiar with every point in the canyon. Being quite cold, I essayed to jump from the load and put on my overcoat, but to my surprise my limbs refused to do my bidding. They were so sore and my body was so badly bruised. I sat there and reflected for a few moments upon my peculiar situation. I looked around my load and found everything in place just as I would have put my things myself. My axe was firmly bedded in the butt end of one of the logs, and everything else was in first-class condition. After making another unsuccessful effort to get from the load, I reached my coat and put it on as best as I could in a sitting posture, and started my oxen for home. I arrived safely about 1 hour later than my usual time. My wife was very uneasy about me on account of my lateness of my arrival, and because of the fear ever present within her during the whole of the day that something would happen to my injury. She met me at the corral and carried me in her arms to the house. I love that picture. Which she was then quite able to do. He had a very strong wife, yeah, like I couldn't do that. I weighing but a little over 100 pounds. I was placed in a comfortable position on the bed, and she then cared for my team. For some days she carefully nursed me before I was able to move around the house. I have hesitated to narrate this incident because of the skepticism which is so common at the present day, even among some who profess to be saints concerning things somewhat supernatural, but I can truthfully testify in all soberness that some power, which I did not see, assisted me from the position which doubtless would have speedily cost me my life. As I was preserved for some purpose known to my Heavenly Father, so do I also believe that God will bless and preserve the lives of His faithful children, just as long as it is necessary for them to live, to accomplish their missions upon the earth. The youth of Zion, and all who have made covenants with the Lord, should therefore exercise faith in Him, and He will, if necessary, send angelic visitors to sustain and preserve those who put their trust in Him. I really like this story, but it's really strange. It's one of those where you're like, huh, I wonder what really happened, and you can only speculate, but it's really interesting that he was literally pinned by the logs that he had cut down, and he could not free himself. He tried and tried, and eventually passed out. Not sure why, but there's lots of reasons to pass out, so it could be a lot of things. But and then when he woke up, everything was done as if he had done it. Yeah, he was completely freed, and he was just chilling on his log stack, ready to go home. So there's the question: did he just black out consciously, and he still kept working, or was someone there to help him that he didn't see, or was it some angelic ministration? Yeah, those are the options, I guess. That's all I can think of, unless you have another explanation. But I think that's a really interesting story. I also think it's a little strange, this picture of his wife coming out and picking him up and carrying him home. That's just kind of cute. And also saying he only weighed 100 pounds. I find that kind of difficult to believe. I mean, unless he was quite underfed at the time, because he was naturally quite a large guy. He had big, broad shoulders and stuff. So I'm not sure how that's possible, and also since he was working so physically, it just seems strange to me, but maybe he did have some issues, or maybe this was early on in his life before he became big and brawny, which some people become later in life, So, I don't know. It's a good question, but I do like the story, though. It's an interesting accident. It's the accident. In the early spring of 1854, he moved to Bountiful, where he engaged in shingle making for a brother Ricks. At this time, there were a very few inhabitants of the town, and the land was in process of distribution. Brother Merrill received a certificate from President Young, granting him 100 acres, an unusually large amount at that time. Of this, Brother Merrill gave 1/3 to his father-in-law, and later divided what was left to him with a poor Scandinavian neighbor. A few months later, President Young spoke to Brother Merrill about the land, and was pleased, though not surprised, to learn that he had divided it up among his brethren. President Young then remarked that when the certificate was given, he felt satisfied that Brother Merrill would not keep it all. During the winter of 1859 and 1860, Elders Benson and Hyde called at the home of Brother Merrill and advised him to move to Cache Valley, where there was more land and were better prospects financially and a good opening for the saints. He made preparation, and in February 1860 went to Richmond, but did not remain long. In March of the same year, he made the journey again and found the snow still very deep. At this time, there were but few people in Logan or Cache Valley, the first settlers having come to that place in 1859. Journeying farther north, Elder Merrill made his way to Richmond in company with others and camped for some time where the dairy north of town now stands. And they were about to continue in the northerly direction of their travels when a voice came to Brother Merrill saying, "Turn around and go south." The words were repeated, and without saying anything to his companions, Elder Merrill started southward and stopped when they reached the point where Richmond now stands, and there began work. It was during these early years that Brother Merrill established his reputation as a most indefatigable and ceaseless worker. From 4 in the morning till late at night he toiled in the canyons, making his 2 trips a day. Naturally, the leader of the community in which he lived, he was elected in 1861 as the 2nd bishop in Richmond. This office he filled for 18 years. So, yeah, but it's interesting that they came to his house and were like, "Go to Cache Valley," and he's like, "Okay," and he just gets up and goes. And also, I feel like that requires a lot of faith. And then he became a bishop and was bishop for 18 years. That's quite a long stint. Yeah. It was during the years of his bishopric at Richmond that the Utah Northern Railroad was under construction from Ogden to Idaho and Montana. Elder Merrill now became a contractor in the construction of the road, and in a sense a mediator between the people of Cache Valley and the railroad company. During his relations with that road, he distributed among the people for work done some $780,000. For his own work, he received $150 per month. In addition to his personal services, he also entered into contract with the company by which he used his own teams and gave employment to his family. This was the beginning of his financial progress. The relationship between the company and Brother Merrill became, in time, of the most cordial character. His judgment was relied upon, and the company was highly satisfied with the relation sustained between it and him. In some places, as in Beaver Canyon, the work was taken at such a low figure by the contracts into which he entered that he himself made nothing, but the people did well. The company, learning of this and aware of the money and time he had saved them, gave him a souvenir, a gold watch. Yeah. So he's kind of a quiet worker, like he'll just do his part and, he doesn't really need credit for it. That's one of the reasons, in my opinion, why he is so little known, is that he doesn't need acknowledgement of things that he does. I don't think he asked them for a gold watch. They just gave it to him, yeah? On his return to Richmond after the construction of the road, he invested his money in 320 acres of land and a grist mill. The latter brought in very little income, but proved of great value to the people. Yeah, see, that's typical him, yeah? It's typical Merrill. It was now that he was prepared to pursue the natural bent of his inclinations, and his time has since been devoted to stock raising and agriculture. Today, his large farms and the enormous products which they yield attest his splendid success in advanced agriculture, a profession for which he possessed the strongest inclinations. In 1870, he was given a 3 months' leave of absence to take a short mission to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, but in 2 months was recalled. In 1879, he was called a counselor to the stake to Bishop Preston, an office which he held for 10 years. So he was a bishop for 18 years, and then he was a counselor in stake presidency for another 10. Yeah, he has very long-term callings, I feel like. In 1884, he was counselor in the stake to President Card, and in the same year, he was appointed to the presidency of the Logan Temple with Apostle Thatcher and Elder Edlifson as his counselors. Apostle Thatcher is Moses Thatcher, yeah. In 1889, he was ordained an apostle by President Woodruff, Presidents George Buchanan and Joseph F. Smith, and 8 of the apostles being present. The following year, he went east to get the genealogy and record of his family. In October of 1899, he was appointed president of the Cache Stake of Zion. During his residence in Cache Valley, he was prominent in the civil affairs of the county and stake. In 1876 and 1878, he served 2 terms in the legislature, one in the House and one in the Council. He was a member of the county court for more than 10 years. The position of postmaster in Richmond he held for 20 years. In 1896, he was appointed a member of the Agricultural College Board, which office he held for nearly 4 years. At present, he is a member of the Brigham Young College Board. Yeah, so they're kind of like giving a double, like a bullet list, yeah? Yeah, I'm not going to comment too much about it. It was very quick, and we haven't yet talked about him being called as an apostle, so hopefully they'll mention it soon. Perhaps one of the greatest characteristics of Apostle Merrill's life, and the one for which he will be most noted among generations to come, is the large and honorable family which will ever characterize his name. His family is not only one of the largest in the church, but one of the most exemplary to be found anywhere. He is the father of 45 children, 5 of whom are dead. He is the grandfather of 127, and has 26 children married. 6 of his sons have already been called on a mission. A number have become prominent in educational circles, and all are industrious and thrifty citizens of the communities in which they live. All of his children enjoy a good standing in the church, and it is not known that any of them are addicted to any bad habits. It's quite a family. I believe he had 6 wives, if I'm not mistaken. I'll look that up afterwards. But 6 wives and 45 children. That's a lot. Yeah. Apostle Merrill is one of those positive characters who do not yield to the floating opinions and momentary prejudices. His convictions grow by experience and observation, and when once formed are not easily removed. His life has always been characterized by the greatest earnestness and sincerity, and the simple and unaffected manners of his intercourse with men constitute one of the greatest charms of his personality. He is further a man of strong attachments, and his friendship, when once bestowed, is of the most enduring quality. His great sympathies and generous nature make his advice frequently sought by his brethren, and he is perhaps nowhere stronger in the church today than in the capacity of a private adviser and counselor to those in misfortune as well as to those who need guidance in the affairs of life. J. M. Tanner. I missed a few things, so I'm going to go back to my own article that I've written, because one of the things that surprised me about Elder Merrill is, okay, so he they didn't even mention when he was called as an apostle, yeah? So he was called as an apostle on the 7th of October, 1889 by Wilford Woodruff. And he was 57 at the time. So he was released from, I believe, from the presidency of the Logan Temple into to become an apostle. After which, he was called the stake president of the Cache Valley stake, which is his home stake. Yes? And just say that he moved to Cache Valley. So let's see if I can find that part. He was called at the same time as Elders Anton H. Lund and Abraham H. Cannon, who I believe we will get to. Yeah. And then he went east to get his genealogy. Oh, he had 8 wives, my bad. I thought it was 6. Okay, 8 makes more sense, especially with 45 children. Okay, then he had an interesting thing that happened. So he and his home bishop had a disagreement, yeah? And he was an apostle, and I believe he was stake president at the time. And he got in an argument with his bishop from his home ward about something. It's not that important what the thing was. Some people's feelings were hurt. After that, he didn't go back to his home ward for a full calendar year. I think that's interesting that that happened, and then the first presidency of the church censured him for not going to his home ward and told him to go and make up with your bishop and, go back to your regular ward. But yeah, he wasn't happy about that, and it was really hard for him to go back. So what does that say about his character? I feel like he's a very shy person. He doesn't like attention, and he was embarrassed and didn't want to talk to the bishop and clear the air because it's embarrassing. Yeah? I don't know who was wrong in that situation. It doesn't really matter. They both needed to apologize. Also, since he was he was so old when he was called as an apostle. So he, like most of the apostles at the time, it doesn't seem old for now terms. People who are called now are usually around this age, 57. But people at the time, like Abraham H. Cannon, I believe, was 25, who was called at the same time as him. And so when you think about the others who were called around that time, who were very young, and then him in the middle as being like the old guy, yeah, it's just that he's not very well known. And I think that his introversion and the fact that he is not very bold and doesn't want to travel much, and he didn't really travel much. He didn't get called on a mission. He didn't go to Europe, like lots of the other people we've read about had been, not necessarily Europe, but on a mission, like Joseph S. Smith and George Q. Cannon went to Hawaii, but he didn't travel. He wasn't bold. He was soft-spoken. He was a quiet dude, yeah? And he would just work hard and get his work done, introverted, go back home happy, And I just feel like that's why he's not known. And I feel like of all apostles, he would have preferred that. Last paragraph here, Elder Marriner W. Merrill died 6th of February 1906 at the age of 73 of kidney failure. And then they already mentioned what a large family he had. He was married to a total of 8 wives and had 46 children. And one of his sons, Joseph F. Merrill, if you've heard the name, also served in the Quorum of the 12 a few years afterwards, obviously. So it's more his legacy. Okay, so here's my conclusion from my article. Conclusion. What kind of man was Elder Marriner W. Merrill? He was a man of great testimony. He was a hard worker. He was patient and willing to work for everything that he had. He was a loyal husband and had a strong testimony of polygamy. The incident about preaching politics also shows us that deep down, he was a shy man, which also explains his embarrassment when called upon to pray in public at a young age. He didn't always know what to say. but he had tried his best to act according to his convictions. He wasn't perfect, but he tried to improve himself at all times. He wasn't called to travel great distances and spent most of his adult life in Cache Valley, but he faithfully fulfilled his callings in his own little corner of Zion. He was a man who practiced what he preached. He was the kind of example that we could all follow. So, yeah, I do admire him as a person, and I think that he was just very introverted. And that was like a good reason why he isn't well known today. He just wasn't that kind of person. He didn't like the spotlight, and he never wanted it on him. Anyways, I feel like of all the apostles that he's quite relatable, you know, at least for myself. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. If you did like the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.